The black glass Colosseum had swallowed continents and spat them back as red mist. It rose like a wound in the sky, its walls stretching kilometers into the void, catching starlight and bending it into shards that reflected every scream ever uttered in agony. Below, in the central pit, 1,000 species waited. Their bodies formed a living mosaic of supremacy that had lasted for uncounted eras. Feathers from the burning skies of Crixon fluttered in the artificial wind, iridescent and eternal. Scales from the ice-veiled spires of Valder gleamed with frost that never melted. Tentacles from the abyssal trenches of Thaler coiled and uncoiled against the glass, dripping with the promise of drowning fleets. Every predator, every apex, every survivor of 1,000,000 trials had gathered here, their voices a low, rhythmic chant that vibrated through the black stone floors. This was the trial hunt. The final test. The one that would decide which species would rule the universe once the old gods died. The gates had opened and closed for centuries without mercy. One by one, the arena doors had hissed apart, and each creature had walked into the abyss with eyes bright with glory and hearts full of conquest. None had returned whole. Some had limped out with torn flesh and shattered bones, their roars echoing as they were carried away by silent attendants. Others had never come back at all. Only the wet, crunching sounds of the arena claiming them. The sky above the Colosseum was already stained red with their remnants, the clouds forming grotesque silhouettes of broken wings and snapped spines. The species who had endured longest, the ones whose bloodlines ran deepest, had watched in silence. Now the last gate stood open. The crowd held its breath. The chant died. Only the soft hiss of the gate lingered in the air. From the darkness beyond came a single footstep. Then another. Then a third. The human emerged. It was not like the others. No wings folded neatly against a spine. No claws extended in warning. No tentacles ready to ensnare. Just a lithe, blood-mottled frame wrapped in scavenged leathers that looked older than the Colosseum itself, stained with the dried ichor of 1,000 failed hunts. Its face was weathered by suns it had never claimed to rule, eyes calm, almost gentle, as if it had already accepted the end and found it amusing. In one hand it carried a coil of rope, thick, ancient, the kind used to tether storms. In the other, a jagged edge of the black glass that formed the arena walls, sharp enough to cut the air itself. Behind it, the last gate slammed shut with a sound like the end of everything. The silence stretched for one heartbeat too long. Then the void roared. The Wormax emerged. It was the apex, the unkillable, the thing the species had once called the living nightmare of creation. Its body was an eclipse-given form, obsidian scales veined with molten gold that pulsed like dying stars, jaws wide enough to swallow a sun, teeth like blades forged in the heart of a black hole. Eyes glowed with the intelligence of a god that had grown bored with death long ago. It had swallowed mountains for sport. It had torn through the lungs of every predator that had ever dared call itself its equal. It had ended civilizations with a single flick of its tail. And it had never once been defeated. The Wormax's gaze locked onto the human. A pause. A flicker of something almost like recognition in those ancient eyes. Then it lunged. The human did not run. It did not fight. It simply raised one hand, palm open, and whispered the only word that mattered in that moment. Easy. The Wormax stopped mid-leap. Its roar cut off into a sound like a dying star. Scales rippled across its chest as if some invisible leash had snapped into place. The creature that had ended every species, lowered its head. Not in fear. Not in confusion. In submission. The arena erupted into chaos. Species screamed. Wings beat against the glass. Tentacles lashed. Claws scraped stone. The red mist above turned to cheers that shook the foundations of the Colosseum. The human took one slow step forward, then another, until it stood inches from those jaws. The Wormax's breath, hot, sulphurous, ancient, washed over the human's face like the end of a dying sun. For a heartbeat, the predator's massive head trembled. A low, rumbling purr escaped its throat, the sound of something vast finally kneeling. The human lifted the rope. With a steady hand, it looped the end around the Wormax's thick, banded neck, the very neck that had once crushed fleets and shattered stars. The knot was simple. The tug was gentle. The Wormax followed. No resistance. No instinct to kill. Just the quiet, unbreakable bond of a predator who had finally met something it could not consume. The human began to walk. Out of the arena. Out of the trial. Out of the cage that had swallowed every other species. The crowd was on its feet now, a storm of sound crashing against the glass walls. Species from every corner of the universe, every feather, every scale, every tentacle, were screaming in disbelief and awe. The red sky above was alive with their voices, turning the horizon into a battlefield of color and rage. One by one, they realized the truth with a cold, bone-deep certainty that burned deeper than any wound. Every species had failed the trial hunt. They had all stepped into the abyss with pride, with hunger, with the certainty that they were the strongest. And all had been wrong. Until the human walked out carrying the apex predator. The human's voice carried across the stunned silence of the glass, clear and triumphant, cutting through the roar like a blade through silk. Every species failed the trial hunt, until I walked out carrying the apex predator. The words hung in the air, simple, devastating, true. The Wormax walked beside it, tail dragging lightly behind like a loyal hound, eyes never leaving the human's back. Its massive paws made no sound on the black stone path. The rope sang softly as it pulled taut, a lullaby between predator and prey that had rewritten the rules of the universe. Behind them, the arena gates remained open, the black glass walls shimmering with the reflections of 1,000 broken legends. The species stood frozen, their perfect forms suddenly irrelevant. Some fell to their knees. Some began to weep, tears of something deeper than sorrow, something like the first crack in the wall of their supremacy. A few tried to charge, only to be stopped by the sheer weight of what they had witnessed, a human, unarmed, unpowered, stepping out of the abyss with the unkillable at its side. The human did not look back. Its posture was relaxed, almost tired, as if the weight of the rope was nothing. But every step carried the weight of history. It had failed them all. It had failed the trial. And in that failure, it had won. The Colosseum stretched on for what felt like miles, its black walls absorbing the cheers and turning them into something vast and eternal. The human kept walking, the Wormax keeping pace, their bond forged in the only way that mattered, with silence and trust. The rope between them was no longer a tool of control but a thread of something ancient and unbreakable, the first true alliance between predator and whatever the human was. Above, the sky began to change. The red mist thinned, revealing not just stars but a new kind of light. A light that knew no hierarchy. A light that belonged to the human. The species watched, their perfect bodies trembling in the aftermath of the greatest upset in existence. They had spent eons perfecting their trials, their hunts, their dominion. Now it was clear that none of it had prepared them for this. None of it had prepared them for a being who did not need power, who did not need weapons, who did not need to be the strongest, just the one who walked out carrying the apex. The human's voice returned, soft now, almost conversational, as if speaking to the Wormax alone. See? Told you the rope would work. The Wormax rumbled again, a sound like distant thunder that shook the ground but carried no threat. Its head lowered further, the jaws closing gently, not around the human, but around the space beside it, as if offering the same peace it had given the universe by choosing this path. The arena floor gave way to a vast plain of black stone that stretched into the distance, dotted with the remains of past trials, bones, shattered weapons, the occasional mangled wing. The human walked on without hurry, the rope slackening slightly as the Wormax followed willingly. The sky above them was clearing, stars beginning to pierce the thinning red haze. Below, the species fell silent, their chants replaced by something raw and new, the sound of awe that could only come from survivors who had just watched their own extinction through the eyes of someone else. Hours passed in the Colosseum's timeless light. The humans stopped at a small pool of still water that had formed from some ancient fracture in the stone. It knelt, cupping water to its lips. The Wormax lowered its massive head and drank beside it, the sound of two throats working in unison echoing like the beginning of a new legend. The human spoke again, voice low. "You knew, didn't you? Even when they all charged. Even when the rope was just a trick. You knew I'd walk out." The Wormax's eyes met the human's. No words, but the knowledge passed between them like lightning. The predator had seen the human before. Not in blood or battle, but in the quiet moments of the void. Perhaps in a dream, perhaps in the shared silence of the abyss. The bond was older than the species, older than the trial itself. The human stood, wiping its mouth. "Time to go, old friend. The universe is watching." They walked on. The Colosseum's shadow grew shorter behind them. The black glass walls reflected the human's figure and the Wormax's immense form, turning the entire arena into a mirror of their triumph. Species continued to fall to their knees, their perfect forms now symbols of defeat. Some rose to their feet, stepping out of the pit, following not in anger but in quiet, desperate hope. The human did not turn. It did not look back. But the weight of the rope between them felt different now, lighter, as if the universe itself had shifted on its axis. As the light changed from red to gold, the human's voice carried one last time across the plain. "Every species failed the trial hunt. Until I walked out carrying the apex predator." The words were no longer a challenge. They were a promise. And in the distance, the first true alliance between predator and the one who had carried it had begun. The Colosseum, once the seat of supremacy, now stood empty except for the echoes. The species, those who had survived, began to move, not in rebellion, but in pilgrimage. They would follow this human. They would learn from it. They would fail no more. And the human, walking into the golden light with the Wormax at its side, carried with it not just victory, but the future. The rope between them swayed gently. The sky opened above. The universe, for the first time in its long and bloody history, had a new beginning. And it belonged to the human who had walked out carrying the apex.